Greetings. Welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Friday, February 14th, 2025, so happy Valentine's Day. Today we're going to be talking about human behavior and justifications. Over the previous two vlogs, I first outlined the importance of forgiveness, as well as the challenges associated with forgiveness. In particular, the problems of persistent dishonesty and gaslighting, as well as chronic forms of abuse or controlling behavior. For these fundamentally undermine trust and our ability to sustain healthy interpersonal relationships. Then in yesterday's vlog, I discussed these problems in relation to powerful figures, or public figures, who might then use their positions to lie, exploit, manipulate, and undermine trust in knowledge and public institutions in general. So today, what I want to do in part 3 is turn our attention then to focus more inward, if you will. And in particular, what I'd like to do is examine the dynamics of human behavior and why we sometimes allow ourselves to be taken in by the swindlers or the charlatans, to be deceived, or even abused. And at one level, it's quite obvious that we crave some degree of security, reassurance. We live in a world, obviously, of uncertainty in certain respects, scarcity, potential threats to our well-being. And not surprisingly, then, we all recognize that at times we can be vulnerable. And under the right circumstances, those vulnerabilities can be exploited. The research in general confirms that when we're at our weakest points, those moments of crisis or serious transitions, we're more susceptible to being taken advantage of, radically breaking from our pasts, even joining a cult. But even in our everyday lives, our comings and goings, our regular experiences, we may not always have our antenna up. We may not always be able to quickly or immediately recognize potential fraud or to protect our interests and our well-being at all times. Unfortunately, there's another aspect of our human beingness that serves as another, kind of a sort of double-edged sword, if you will. That is our own cognitive biases. We learn to process information in particular ways, consistent with our cultural backgrounds, and as a means of creating efficiencies in our daily lives. And challenging those biases can be difficult. We have limited time and energy, all of us, to truly absorb better and new information. Instead, we typically find sources of information that reinforce our preconceived notions or our worldviews. And that allows us to sort of quickly navigate the requirements of daily living, to do our jobs efficiently, and so forth. And it makes life a lot simpler when we don't have to sort of do the heavy lifting associated with having to be truly knowledgeable or experts in so many different areas. It's what I sort of call the auto mechanic effect. And what do I mean by that? Well, most people, again, don't have the time, the energy, or the mental bandwidth to become deeply knowledgeable, especially about their vehicles or vehicle repairs. And so we're therefore often at the mercy of mechanics, auto mechanics. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but nearly all of us, to be sure, if we own a vehicle, we almost certainly want to find a good, honest mechanic. So I found one. I was lucky back in the 1990s. A guy by the name of Ray. He was truly a godsend, as it turned out, because he was honest. He charged me actually less than the standard rate at that time. And he only did the work that was absolutely necessary. Now, how do I know that? Well, I'd actually taken the car first to him one time when I'd taken it to a sort of one of the larger repair places. And they gave me a quote for a number of things that had to be done, supposedly. And I was shocked at the amount that I would have had to pay. So I actually just saw the sign for Ray's shop outside a gas station and a car wash where I typically went. And I thought, oh, what the heck? I'll go in and talk to Ray, see what he has to say. Well, what a fortuitous meeting. Really nice guy. And so I showed him what what the other business had told me I needed to have done. And I said, I'm going to leave it with you, and I want you to tell me your honest opinion about what you think needs to be done. And he did just that. In fact, he said almost, when I talked to him later that day or at the end of the day, he said, Joe, most of this doesn't have to be done. It's BS. He was really quite straightforward with me. And he basically was saying that, they were definitely trying to pinch me for a lot of extra money. And that, of course, made me feel, used. It made me upset. So anyway, long story short, he did the work, and I saved hundreds of dollars back in the 1990s, and with a couple of kids, it really made a big difference. And so I got to know Ray a little bit better, and in fact, the way he worked is he allowed me at times, if I wanted to pick up parts that I might need for repairs on my own, get them at the cheapest place I could or at the Canadian Tire or what have you. And then he'd say, here are the options, for low, medium quality or high quality parts. So I could make the choice of how much I wanted to spend. And he would tell me his recommendations, and that's what I would do. And then I'd take it in, and he'd do the work and just charge me for the labor. So he was fantastic. And in short, basically, Ray ended up doing two wonderful things for me. He kept me totally informed of what, I needed to do and when and so forth for each of my vehicles for over 25 years, basically. And secondly, as a result, he saved me thousands of dollars in unnecessary auto work. And so what did he get out of the relationship? Well, from a purely business standpoint, he certainly knew that I'd always come back to him, and I did, as I said, for about 25 years. And he's retired now, by the way. And of course, I referred all my family and friends to him as well. And turns out, all of them ultimately, too, would sing Ray's praises. And so he was almost like a family member, right? In fact, I'd even take cars in that I was thinking about buying, and he'd look them over and give me his advice. I remember one time I had a minivan, and he strongly recommended against buying it based on what he saw and so forth. And then I brought in another one, and he said, no, this is the one. This is a great deal. Didn't even charge me. That's the kind of guy he was. So he got a ton of business from me, and he got a lot of social praise and validation as well. In a word, Ray was trustworthy. He was completely honest. He did the job properly. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. I never once had to take the car back and say, hey, you messed up, or what did you do here, or anything like that. And we all want to find people that we can trust, and people that'll do a great job for us. People who are honest in, virtually all spheres of our lives. So, and then that, presents us with a question. Well, how many people do we have to rely on? And beyond the auto mechanics of the world, in a complex world where we would otherwise need expertise and services, and we don't have them in most of the areas that we would need, from transportation, like car repairs, that sort of thing, to cell phones, from household appliances to computers, from recommendations for doctors and dentists or which schools we should attend, from plumbing or electrical repairs, or just about anything else we might not know how to do in terms of our own home repairs and that sort of thing. So, outside of our spouse and our partner and our children, perhaps, don't you pretty much love your incredible handyman or your auto mechanic or your housekeeper, don't you love them just about as much as and sometimes more? You know what I mean. And when we find people that we can trust and believe in, we want to keep them in our lives forever. So in the public sphere, though, it's much harder to evaluate the quality of the information to make the informed decisions that we need to make. We don't have the expertise in many of the fields to begin with. How many of us are following the latest scientific research on stem cells or electric vehicles or solar energy? Or are you following the latest developments in 5G technology or AI? What about tracking the spread of infectious diseases? Indeed, how do we go about assessing and evaluating general public health risks? Or closer to home, what about dietary risks or problems with issues like diabetes or any other issues that might adversely affect our health and well-being? We are quickly overwhelmed, and so we have to simplify, and often dramatically. And that's not even considering the many other political, economic, and cultural realms where we have to process all kinds of information as well and make multiple, hundreds of other decisions. And those decisions often relate to realms where we define our identities, where we feel most comfortable. So, for example, just look at the divided reaction to Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl halftime show this past weekend. The cultural and generational divides and the reactions are patently obvious. If you've ever looked at the intersection of sports and entertainment, if you look at just the differences between those who love certain kinds of music or who love rap music versus those who despise rap music, those who find themselves on the opposite sides of the U.S. political divide, and so on. And so even the rap genre and the whole performance will resonate deeply with some demographics, and yet others watching the Super Bowl won't have the slightest interest in rap music. Okay? And this is obvious, but my point is that it's connected to our deeper senses of identity and how we process information, and what constitutes good versus bad information, or faulty or misleading information. And around cultural issues, it's extremely nebulous and subjective at times. So, what's our default setting? And especially when we don't know a lot about the subject or we don't have a lot of familiarity, we put our faith in that and in those with whom we are most familiar. That which already aligns with our preconceptions and worldviews, the beliefs in our team or our tribes, however those might be constituted. And so it's a lot easier to put your trust and faith in a leader or even a con man who has convinced you of his worldview. And I'm using the gender pronouns here associated with maleness because they are overwhelmingly males. There are some females, but these figures that I'm talking about on the world stage are almost always males. And there's so many out there who claim that only he can save you, that only he knows the answers, that only he can protect you. And that's been the strategy of cult leaders and all kinds of authoritarian figures throughout history. We know this quite well. We know that many of those who have effectively been able to rise to power across different institutional spheres have certain characteristics themselves, but they're more importantly able to tap in to the cultural zeitgeist and to the vulnerabilities of a people's within or even sometimes across societies. So how does this happen? Well, it's rooted in what I've just described. The path of least resistance typically involves identifying with those people and those ideas and languages that we know best, that we've grown to accept almost as second nature. It's what I call the distorting lens of sociocultural attractions. So just as massive objects bend light waves and even gravity, the mass of our most important social connections or the biggest symbols in our lives bend the light of our understanding and our perceptions. So when we hear our spoken language, when we see people that look like ourselves, we're convinced that we understand those people better. We hear a certain dialect, even a certain accent, and again, we understand and we can connect even better. In contrast, what happens if people do not speak our particular language? Or what if we don't understand them and we don't understand their accents? Well, we know that the communication almost invariably breaks down. So, for example, here's a recent instance where the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, has to respond, or he's in an interview situation there with the PM of Israel, whom you see on screen, and he has to respond. That is, President Trump has to respond to a reporter's question, and here's what happens.
Do you have any plan to change Afghanistan situation? Are you able to recognize Taliban? Because I'm an Afghan journalist, Afghan suffrage woman. Any comment about Afghanistan? What's your future plan for Afghan people, especially Afghanistan?
I have a little hard time understanding you. Where are you from? Actually, it's a beautiful voice and a beautiful accent. The only problem is I can't understand a word you're saying. But I just say this, good luck, live in peace. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so rather than respond to the reporter's questions, and by the way, just to be clear, so the reporter was asking, I mean, I didn't have too much trouble understanding the person, but nonetheless, I mean, once the volume was turned up, they were asking, do you have any plans to change Afghanistan's situation? Are you able to recognize the Taliban? Because I'm an Afghan journalist. I'm a woman. Any comment about Afghanistan? What's your plan for Afghan people? Especially, and then that's when President Trump breaks in with I have a little hard time understanding you. Where are you from? She states Afghanistan. He says, oh, actually, it's a beautiful voice and a beautiful accent. The only problem is I can't understand a word you're saying. But I just say this, good luck, live in peace. So, and then he points to another reporter for the next question. And that's perhaps one of Trump's politest dismissals that I've seen. He was able to dismiss the reporter and not respond, choosing to focus on and indeed to compliment the reporter's accent. But he didn't choose to seek clarification. He didn't really want to know what she was asking, right? She wasn't trying to understand or attempting to substantively engage in any commentary on her country's situation, where, of course, the U.S. has had some major involvement. So the most common reaction then tends to be one in which we maintain our boundaries and we stay in our comfort zones. We remain comfortably situated within those worlds where we have been able to bridge relational and cultural divides that separate peoples from one another. The birds of a feather adage, quite apt here, and still holds true, and for most of us in our intimate spheres at least. Even in open and democratic societies, we still tend to marry homogamously. That is to say, we tend to marry other people who, on average, who are more similar to us in terms of their ethno-racial identities, in terms of their shared languages, common religions, or a lack of religious commitment for that matter, and even social class backgrounds as well. So all of this then simplifies our realities and our daily investments of energy. The psychological mechanisms include confirmation and selection biases, especially in processing information. So just as we gravitate towards others who look like us, we gravitate towards processing information and building our knowledge in ways that reinforce our worldviews, our common understandings. And therein lies the proverbial catch-22. That is, to move out of our comfort zones and to break out of our habits requires exposure to greater diversity of people and ideas. And that's the ultimate challenge, especially when we're convinced that we, ourselves, and that our kind are the good people, the noble, the virtuous, and that we and our kind are the most enlightened. If we close our social circles, if we draw the curtains in our houses, we do end up risk blocking out the light and making growth and progress in our lives. Truth be told, a lot of folks have settled on, they're quite happy with their worldviews. They're fully convinced of their long-standing beliefs and even their righteousness. And they'd rather ignore those parts of their belief systems or faith traditions that might generate a bit of cognitive dissonance. Ultimately, I do wonder just how many folks have basically stopped taking in new information or learning. I mean, not completely, but for the most part. I don't know the answer to that question. Or how many folks are just simply too exhausted to be able to, or they don't have the energy to try to understand foreign ideas and languages and peoples vastly different from their own. And that, by the way, is one of the themes of Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. There are actually multiple layers and themes, and I'll be reviewing that performance next Tuesday from the Dr. J Experience's perspective when we look at music and the arts. For now, though, I challenge you to always strive to step outside of your comfort zones, to try to understand people who don't look like yourselves or don't sound like yourselves and may have different ideas altogether. Again, that's difficult to do. But if you're able to do that, I think it'll protect you from being misled, from going down pathways or rabbit holes that you don't want to find yourself stuck in. And most importantly, I think that's essential, as far as I understand, to be able to continue to grow and learn and evolve, if you will. I often say that the day that I'm no longer interested in learning anything new will be the day that I'm pretty convinced that it'll be a good day to die. Well, that's not today, though. And I don't believe for quite a while. So, as ever, for now, thanks for listening. And if you appreciate the work that I'm doing on the Dr. J Vlog series, please hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. But regardless, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts. Until next time.